If you had asked me 5 years ago whether my parents loved me, I would have smiled without hesitation and said yes. Of course they did. They were my parents. And I was their only daughter. But love, I have learned, can wear many masks. It can hold your hand while quietly emptying your pockets. It can look you in the eye and smile, while hiding something that would one day break your entire world. My name is Sarah. I am 32 years old. And for 6 years of my adult life, I sent my parents $2,000 every single month. Not because I had to, because I wanted to, because I believed in family, because I was told over and over again that family takes care of family. I sacrificed vacations I longed for. I wore the same coat for 3 winters in a row. I passed up graduate school opportunities that could have changed my career, because I could not afford the tuition after my monthly transfers. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself my parents needed me. I told myself I was a good daughter. And then came my wedding day. The day that was supposed to be the most beautiful chapter of my life became the moment my entire story cracked open at the seams. The morning light was gold and perfect. The flowers were exactly as I had dreamed. My dress was waiting, white and still, on a hanger near the window. And then my maid of honor walked in with a look on her face that I will never, as long as I live, forget. She didn't have to say a word. I already knew. In the deep, terrible place that lives in the chest of every woman who has ever loved someone who did not deserve it, that everything was about to change. But let me take you back. Because to understand what happened at that wedding, you need to understand how I got there. You need to walk with me through the years, through the love, the sacrifice, the blind trust, and the slow, painful unraveling of a truth I never wanted to face. This is not just a story about betrayal. It is a story about what happens when you love people with your whole heart, and they love you only with their convenience. I grew up in a modest home in a mid-sized city. My father was a charming man, the kind of person who could walk into any room and own it within minutes. He had a warm laugh, big stories, and an even bigger belief that the world owed him something. My mother was quieter, more careful with her words, but she always stood behind my father like a shadow. Whatever he decided, she nodded. We were not poor, but we were not comfortable either. My parents struggled financially for as long as I could remember. There were always unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, always quiet arguments behind closed doors, always a tension in the house that nobody named, but everybody felt. I became the kind of child who overachieved to compensate for the chaos at home. I studied hard, earned a scholarship, graduated near the top of my class, and landed a well-paying job in corporate finance by the time I was 24. I was proud of myself, and my parents were proud too. Or so I believed. It started small, the way most dangerous things do. The first time my father called and asked for money, I didn't think twice. He said the car needed emergency repairs. He sounded embarrassed. I sent $500 within the hour. It felt good. It felt like I was finally able to give back to the people who had raised me. The second time, my mother called. She said the electricity bill was overdue and they didn't want to worry me, but they had no one else to turn to. Another $400. Again, no hesitation. By the time I was 26, the calls had become monthly, structured, almost scheduled. My father would call on the 1st or 2nd of every month, and within 20 minutes, the conversation would arrive at the same destination. They needed help. They had expenses. The money I made was more than enough, wasn't it? And I, out of love, out of guilt, out of some deep-seated belief that I owed them my success because they had raised me, agreed. $2,000 a month, every month, without fail. I told myself this was love. I told myself this was what good daughters do. But looking back now, I can see the thread I kept pulling. The same one. I should have stopped pulling much sooner. My parents did not struggle the way they claimed. I found this out gradually, in fragments. A comment my aunt made at a family gathering about how my parents had taken a trip to the coast that summer. A photo my cousin posted online showing my mother in a restaurant I could never afford to visit. A moment when I called my father unexpectedly and heard the sound of a sports game on a very large television in the background. And he mentioned offhandedly that they had just upgraded. I asked gently. I asked carefully. Each time, there was an explanation. The trip was a gift from a friend. The restaurant was a rare celebration. The television was secondhand. I believed them. I wanted to believe them, until the day I visited unannounced. I had been working a grueling project and had a rare free weekend. I decided impulsively, joyfully to drive 3 hours and surprise my parents. I imagined my mother's face lighting up. I imagined my father's big hug. I bought pastries from their favorite bakery and drove with the windows down, singing along to the radio. What I found when I pulled up to their street stopped me cold. Their house, the modest, slightly run-down house I had grown up in, was gone. In its place stood something I did not recognize. A freshly painted exterior, new double-pane windows, a landscaped front yard with flowers and stone borders, a new car in the driveway that was neither second-hand nor inexpensive. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before I went inside. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. Her face flickered. Surprise, then something else. Something that looked almost like guilt before she smoothed it away behind a smile. "Sarah, we weren't expecting you." "I can see that," I said. And I stepped inside. The interior had been renovated. New flooring, new kitchen, new furniture. Everything that had been worn and tired when I was growing up had been replaced with things that were polished and new. I sat down at a kitchen table that cost more than 2 months of my rent and asked my mother, very quietly, to explain. She said they had saved, little by little, over many years. I asked her how, when they had been telling me for years that they barely had enough to cover their basic expenses. She looked at her hands and did not answer. My father came home an hour later. When he saw me, something moved across his face, a flash of discomfort before the charm slid back into place like a mask settling. "My girl, what a wonderful surprise." I didn't smile back. The conversation that followed was the most painful one I had ever had with my parents up to that point. I asked questions they didn't want to answer. I laid out numbers. 6 years, $2,000 a month, $144,000 total, and I watched my father's expression shift from surprise to defensiveness to something that looked almost like contempt. "We needed that money," he said. "You don't understand what it costs to live." "I understand exactly what it costs to live," I told him. "I have been living on a fraction of my salary for 6 years, because I was sending you the rest." My mother cried. My father talked in circles. Neither of them apologized. I drove home in silence. I pulled into my parking garage and sat in the dark for a long time, and then I made a decision. I stopped the transfers. The calls that followed were unlike anything I had experienced. My father called daily, at first disappointed, then frustrated, then angry. My mother sent messages telling me I was being selfish. Extended family members I had barely spoken to in years suddenly reached out to tell me I was breaking my parents' hearts, that I was turning my back on the people who had sacrificed everything for me. I stayed quiet. I stayed firm. And then, 2 months later, I met Daniel. Daniel was everything I had not allowed myself to hope for during those years of quiet self-sacrifice. He was kind and grounded and steady. He listened, really listened when I talked. He didn't flinch when I told him the truth about my family situation. He just took my hand and said, "That wasn't love, Sarah. That was something else." We fell in love quickly and deeply. Within a year, he proposed. I said yes with my whole heart, and when the wedding planning began, I made a choice that I thought was generous, perhaps foolishly so. I told myself that regardless of what had happened between us, my parents were still my parents. I invited them. I included my mother in the planning. I even paid for their travel and accommodation, because that was who I was. Because I still hoped. I still hoped they loved me the way I loved them. That hope would shatter on a sunny Saturday morning in June. The morning of my wedding was perfect in every way that a morning can be before everything goes wrong. My bridesmaids were with me in the bridal suite. My maid of honor, Claire, had been my best friend since college, and she knew everything. Every sacrifice, every transferred dollar, every unanswered apology. She had held me through the worst of it and celebrated every moment of healing. It was Claire who knocked on the bathroom door while I was doing my lipstick and asked, in that careful voice she used when something was serious, if she could show me something. She had her phone in her hand. On the screen was a public social media post made by my father that morning. From the hotel we had booked and paid for, he had posted a photo of himself and my mother in the hotel breakfast room, smiling, dressed beautifully. The caption read, "Proud parents celebrating our daughter's wedding. So grateful for this wonderful life God has given us. Blessed beyond measure." And the comments below from family members, from their friends, from people I did not know were full of warmth and congratulations. I would have cried. But what made me go completely still was what Claire showed me next. She scrolled down. Someone, a distant cousin who lived in my parents' city, had commented on the post with a laughing emoji and the words, "About time you shared the good life. Enjoy the resort house, uncle." Resort house. I stared at that phrase for a long moment. Claire watched me with careful, worried eyes. "Sarah," she said gently. I looked it up. "Your parents purchased a vacation property 8 months ago. I found the listing record. It sold for $230,000. $230,000. My 6 years of transfers, $144,000 plus whatever else they had accumulated. Whatever else they had quietly built while I wore a worn coat through 3 winters and turned down graduate school and told myself I was being a good daughter." I set the phone down. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me, in her wedding dress, with her carefully done hair and her trembling hands, had a choice to make. She could walk out of that room carrying all of this. She could let it poison the most important day of her life. She could confront her parents in the middle of a wedding and cause a scene that would overshadow everything she had worked for, or she could breathe. She could decide what this day was really for, and she could deal with the truth the right way, at the right time. I chose to breathe. I looked at Claire. "I'm not going to cry," I told her. "Not today. Not for this." She hugged me so tightly I nearly lost my breath. "Good," she whispered. "You walk down that aisle for you. For Daniel, not for them." And I did. I walked down that aisle on my own. I had planned it that way months ago, because I had known, somewhere deep inside, that I did not want my father to give me away as if I were something that belonged to him. I walked alone, and I held my head up, and when Daniel saw me from the end of the aisle, the look on his face was worth every hard year I had ever lived. The ceremony was beautiful. Our vows were real and quiet and full of everything that mattered. My parents sat in the front row, looking proud. My mother dabbed at her eyes. My father smiled his big, charming smile. I smiled back. I was calm. I was at peace. And I was already planning. 3 days after we returned from our honeymoon, I sat down with Daniel and a lawyer. I laid out every transfer record I had kept over the years, because I had kept them, all of them, meticulously. 6 years of bank statements. Every transfer dated and documented. I did not want the money back. I want to be clear about that. What had already been given could not be undone. And I had no interest in dragging my parents through a legal process that would break whatever remained of our relationship. What I wanted was something else, the truth, acknowledged by them, in writing. I wrote my parents a letter, not angry, not cruel, measured and precise and completely honest. I told them what I knew: the renovated house, the vacation property, the $144,000, the graduate school I had not attended, the years I had spent believing I was helping them survive, when I had actually been helping them build a life they never intended to share with me. I told them I was not going to pretend anymore. I told them that the relationship we had going forward would be real or it would be nothing. That I would not be funding a performance of family while the real thing was withheld from me. And I told them one more thing. I told them that I forgave them. Not because they deserved it, not yet, but because carrying that weight was too heavy for a woman who finally had a real life ahead of her. My father called 3 times after he received the letter. I did not answer. My mother sent a message that said simply, "We never meant to hurt you." It was the closest thing to an apology I ever received. Eventually, after weeks of silence, my father requested a meeting. He came alone. He sat across from me in a coffee shop, and for the first time in my memory, he did not perform. He did not tell stories. He did not turn on the charm. He looked like an old man who was tired. "I knew it was wrong," he said. "I told myself you were doing well. I told myself you could afford it. I told myself you wanted to help us. I did want to help you," I said. "But I also needed the truth. I needed you to tell me when it was enough." He looked at the table. I didn't know how to stop. We kept saying next month, we'll tell her to stop. But you never did. No, he paused. We never did. It was not the dramatic reckoning I had once imagined in my worst moments. There was no public exposure, no grand confrontation. There was just a tired old man in a coffee shop, telling a truth 6 years too late, and a woman across the table who finally understood that closure is not always loud. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it arrives in the space between one breath and the next. I rebuilt my finances over the following 2 years with a focus I had never had before. Daniel and I bought a home. I enrolled in an online graduate program that fit around my career. I started saving in ways I had never been able to. My relationship with my parents is different now, thinner, more honest. The large, warm, unquestioned love I had given them so freely for so long has been replaced by something smaller and more careful, but also, somehow, more real. I see them a few times a year. We talk without pretending. The money is never mentioned, and sometimes in quiet moments, I think about the woman who sat in a cold parking garage 6 years ago, stunned and heartbroken, wondering how people who loved her could do what they did. I want to go back and tell her, they did love you, imperfectly, selfishly, in a way that cost you more than it should have. But love and harm can exist in the same heart, and learning to hold both truths at once is what growing up really means. I want to tell her, the money was never the most important thing you gave them. The most important thing was your trust. And the day you took that trust back, the day you decided your future mattered as much as their comfort, that was the day you became fully, irrevocably, your own person. I want to tell her that the wedding dress hanging by the window was worth the wait, that the man at the end of the aisle was worth every hard year, that the life she is building slowly, steadily, on her own terms, is more beautiful than anything she was taught to expect. If you are someone who has given and given and given to parents, to partners, to friends, until you had nothing left, I want you to hear this. Generosity is a gift, but generosity without boundaries is not love. It is fear. Fear of being unloved if you stop giving. Fear of being called selfish. Fear that your value is measured only in what you provide. You are not a bank. You are not a resource. You are a person, and your needs matter as much as anyone else's. The hardest thing I ever did was stop. Not because stopping was wrong, but because it required me to finally believe that I was worth protecting too. You are worth protecting too. And if someone in your life only loves you for what you give them, that is not love. That is a transaction. And you deserve something real. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your story is not over. The best chapters are still ahead.